on a Friday, not a Sunday evening. You would not be able to make it with all these awards
It's pretty crazy
that you have had to be part of. So
it's been a little silly, isn't it?
I don't know about silly. It's great.
They're always funny. Having done this for 30 some years, you know, the ones you think are super important and are going to change the world, nobody cares about. The ones you do that you're convinced nobody will ever watch, you know, turn into these phenomenon. So it just goes to show, as my mentor used to say, nobody knows anything.
Knows anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm gonna let the students tell me when to shut up.
Okay.
I mean, when to shut up chit-chatting and start formally.
Okay. So I'm just following your lead based on
Yes.
the document you guys sent. I will answer anything. I'm an open book. Anything. Open book.
Cool.
Careful.
Uh-oh.
Are you in New York, Scott?
Today I'm in Connecticut.
You're in Connecticut. Well, but it must be a beautiful day there as well.
It's gorgeous here.
There
I don't know
you
if
go.
you can see out the window.
Yes.
But... yeah.
Ali, should we start? Yeah. I guess Mukti, whenever you want.
Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome, and it's very nice to welcome Scott Frank to Cornell Tech, to the TECHTalk speaker series. I'm not going to do a full formal intro. Anyone who's been watching any during the pandemic, either, you know, Queen's Gambit, of course, the most recent achievement of from Scott, but what I thought I would do quickly and then hand it over to Irene and the others was to give you a quick sense of why I thought Scott would be a great person to invite to Cornell Tech. And it's not just because he's been winning awards and we would all like to brush shoulders with celebrities, although that's a big part for sure. But for a long time, some of you know I've been working on entrepreneurship in creative industries for a while, and for a long time I've noticed a huge similarity between directors and entrepreneurs. And we at Cornell Tech are focused on sort of thinking entrepreneurially, building things. And if you think about what directors do, they're essentially they have an idea. They have to pitch the idea to a team of co-founders, people that are going to start doing the work with them. They have to pitch the idea to funders to raise money for the project. The ideas are often out there, and certainly, as Scott was saying just now earlier, some of them are really sort of, you know, world-changing, and you may or may not find people willing to back those kinds of ideas because there may not be a ready market for these things. And then you have to build the broader team out, and then actually build the product, so to speak. And most importantly, as a director, you do it over and over and over again. And so talk about serial entrepreneurship, talk about building, making things, working with people, selling, pitching. It's something that every director does. And I thought that it would be interesting for us to hear how that plays out in a slightly different context. But I think there's definitely learnings that we can take away even in the tech entrepreneurial kind of world. And so, Scott, thank you very much for being here, for bringing a sort of inspiring breath of fresh air onto the campus where we have focused on building and making and entrepreneurial thinking. It's been a privilege, and again, congratulations on the many awards, very well deserved. It's been fantastic to watch all of the accolades.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here. We're going to have fun.
Yep, absolutely. Irene, take it away.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Scott, and thank you again for joining and congratulations. So Irene and I would be moderating the session today, and we'll be talking about broadly on three main topics. The first one, what Mukti just highlighted, the parallels between movie production and entrepreneurship world. The second one, creating a viral hit on Netflix. And the third one, the role of tech in film industry. So we'll be having a conversation, we'll be leading the conversation for around 30-40 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions for the audience.
Okay.
Arina, do you want to kick us off for the first question?
Yes. So just to add on that, feel free to put your questions in the chat at any point. We're going to try to put them into our conversation if they fit. But also at the end, feel free to raise your hands and like unmute yourselves and ask your question. So firstly, we would like to start with kind of the parallels between executive producer and entrepreneur. Cornell Tech is a campus which is super entrepreneurial. So everyone here has kind of the ambition to start something, a company or a product during their careers. And when we're learning about that, how to do this, we are all the time learning that it's all about the user, it's all about the audience. So we go outside, we talk to them with a bunch of interviews, and we learn about them, right? So I wonder, do you think that creating a film is also the same? It's all about the audience. So do you think kind of that your creative process is like needs to be, you need to first think about the audience and then work on your creative process, or you work on the creative process and you expect your audience understands your thinking process?
That's a really good question, and it's tricky because what you don't want to do, things that particularly with stories or any kind of art form, whether it's music or painting, visual arts or film or television, you have a story you want to tell or a subject that you're interested in creating a story from. And so you can't start with marketing. And studios sometimes do start with marketing. They do. For example, when I first started in the 80s, you would make a film and the studio would decide what they want to make because it's a best-selling book or it's an idea they like or an actor wants to do it. And then they would give it to the marketing people and the marketing people would have to decide how the hell to market it. What evolved at some point in the 90s, say late 90s, is that marketing became involved in the greenlight process and deciding what was being made. And marketing, so you not only had to get approval from the creative executives, you also had to get approval from the marketing executives. In other words, they wanted to know they could sell it. Now, how do they know that? They don't. They think they know that because they think they have formulas and they think, and they're basing it on history, you know, what is sold in the past, what people have told them in test screenings they don't like, but people don't know what they like or don't like until they like it and don't like it. In other words, people may say they hate an unhappy ending or a sad ending until someone does a great movie with a sad ending that happens to work. And so it's a very mechanical process. And so every studio for a long time, and especially in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, they were working from the same playbook. So what you ended up with is the product all looked the same, and it was more concentrated in studios like 20th Century Fox, which was really marketing driven. Every decision was based on marketing, right down to telling screenwriters that they couldn't write action scenes at night because you couldn't see them in trailers. And audiences don't like people with beards, you know, literally stuff like that. They would say all kinds of things that you could do and couldn't do. And it was not based on whether or not it was a good story. None of it was based on any sort of artistic rationale, but it was all a marketing rationale. And so the movies all look the same. And eventually you get a snake that eats its own tail because all the movies feel the same. They end up the same. They're marketed the same, you know, and dangerously close. That happened in the world of superheroes, you know, and it's all Marvel all the time. And you end up making, not only are you selling movies and kind of adhering to the same rules as a group of studios, you're also making the same kinds of movies over and over and over again. So the variety of films have shrunk way down in terms of what will go into the marketplace. And people will say, well, the audience doesn't support that. They don't want to go, you know, the studio is only doing what the audiences want them to do. Yes and no. I mean, it's interesting to, it depends. It all depends. So to your question, just having contextualized all of that, if you're making a film, there's a period of time where you have to just be creative. You can't, everything can't be so transparent that you know why you can't sell it right away. You know why the idea doesn't work right away. You have to take a moment and pretend that the only thing you're thinking about is this idea. And what is the story? What makes it good? Why is it, what is there? You can have a kind of universality about it. There can be something about it that might appeal to a lot of people, or you might be concerned might put off a lot of people, but you have that conversation. And it's not a marketing conversation. It's a, why do people want to be and sit in this story? Why do they, it's not what people are looking for. If you're a writer or a filmmaker and you're making your decisions based on what you think people want, A, you're already 2 years late, because by the time it takes so long to make this stuff that by the time you make it, they want something else. And B, you've basically announced yourself as a hack, that you're basically just going to create whatever people want. You don't care. And that people feel that in stories, and they feel that in art, that something is cynical, that was made by somebody who doesn't care, that was made by somebody who is really trying to sell something. Now, that's different than if you're creating the next model Ford and you're creating a car and you're developing a new car. Then you want to think about, you know, what is the white space out there in the world? What do people need that they're not getting from, you know, their Explorer or whatever it is? What is it people are, what is the feedback? There is a bit of a loop that you have to pay attention to with products. And because they are meant to be used, not experienced. So it's a very different thing. They are meant to be used, and they're meant to function in a very specific way, get you from here to there, cool you off, warm you up, whatever the product is, you know. And so you're thinking about this kind of, you know, what the end use is and who might use it. And also you're thinking about, frequently as entrepreneurs, where is this place out there in the world where there's a product that's missing? You know, there's this thing that's missing, what can we do? But even in this situation, you have to take a moment to quiet all of that, to think about what makes this thing beautiful. What makes, look at what Apple did, you know, what makes this product something you want to hold. And that's not about marketing. That's about a story that people want to tell when they have a specific item. You know, what is it? What is my story when I have this? You know, what is my story when I have this? You know, what is this? What is, that's what it is. And it's, and if you think that way, and you need to imbue it, then you have something that feels like something that's a part of you and feels like something you need. And same with cars. And again, everybody's going to have a different, you know, have different tastes and different sensibilities and so on, but you are trying to connect with a certain person. So it's you don't, even if you start that way, if where you're talking about from thinking about your audience or thinking about your customer, at some point you have to set it all aside and become an artist, you know, in your own world. Be creative. The best entrepreneurs are creative. They've come up with something. They didn't just copy something. So how do you nurture your creative side? And how do you make yourself ripe for inspiration, as opposed to I'm following an algorithm? And that's what separates, that's what creates an entrepreneur, a filmmaker, an artist of any kind, is somebody who's thinking differently and willing, they know what the end use is going to be, but for a moment, what is the story they're going to tell and why is it different? Does that make sense? It's a lot.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a great response. I'm gonna ask you maybe here a follow-up question very shortly. Especially in the beginnings of a director or a producer, you have, a director in this case, you have to sell your ideas, right? And you, how would you go about balancing this creative spot that is coming from you and also selling that idea to someone else and let them trust you, ask them to trust your ideas, right? How would you go about that?
It's hard, you know, if it's very hard. If you pour water on granite, it's going to wash off, but maybe there's a crack or two that the water can get into. So you're looking for those cracks, because remember, you're asking people to commit millions and millions of dollars. You're asking them to commit resources and in service of some idea that you are convinced, so that you are convinced will work. So there is a kind of back and forth that has to happen. Now, some people approach it very perfunctorily. They prepare a pitch and they recite it. They practically read it. They spend an hour going through, if it's a show, every episode, or if it's a movie. I can't do that because it's not engaging. So what you want to do is spin yarn for people, is tell them a story and let them ask, well, how much will this cost? And then the market will decide if they like the story, and if they want to make it. Their appetite is something that comes after the fact. For example, I did a miniseries before The Queen's Gambit called Godless, which was a Western, and it was in period, and it was very expensive, and Netflix spent something like $11 million an episode. It was 7 episodes, maybe 10, something like that, and enormously expensive. But for The Queen's Gambit, which they didn't think was as obvious an idea, they loved the book. They said, we love this book, but really, who's gonna watch this? I got half that to make the show, because they didn't want to commit so much blood and treasure to something they weren't sure if in fact it was going to work. And everything went down: the budget, my fee, all of it, in order to make this thing. So the market decides. Sometimes if you want to work with a company that you prefer, but maybe this company is great artistically, but they don't spend as much, then you're going to take a cut, but your program or your show or your film will be better treated. So you're just trying it out with people. And for me, everybody's style in terms of how they sell or how they pitch is very different. Mine is very casual. I don't tell them a lot. Sometimes I'll say, read this book. I'm going to turn it into a movie, and then we'll talk about what I'm going to do with it. So it's always very different. Some people prepare these intricate things, but the more mechanical it gets, the more dead the finished product becomes. And networks used to make writers, ABC, NBC, CBS, they'd have to do an outline, then they'd have to do a treatment, then they'd have to do a Bible for the show. And by the time they've written all this other stuff, they have no soul left to write the actual show. And because the other people, you needed to understand it in their way, instead of a good entrepreneur, a good leader, understands what people do best and lets them run. If you have a racehorse and you have a jockey who really knows how to handle that super powerful racehorse, you don't get on the back with him and start whispering suggestions in his ear. And yet in Hollywood in particular, that happens a lot. So you are trying to put together work. In other words, if you sell something to the wrong place, you may have succeeded in selling it and setting it up, but it may be the wrong place, and you may not be able to do the thing you want to do, and then you're entered in the wrong sort of collaboration. And again, collaboration is another word I would use a lot in terms of what you're talking about. Entrepreneurs are also great collaborators. Yes, you have a vision, but if you don't know how to motivate people or how to pick the right people so that the equation is always 1 and 1 equals 3, if you can't do that, then you're not going to get anywhere. An idea isn't enough. What is the talent behind that idea? How do you know what to do with that idea? And sometimes you have to be supple in the way you move in order to change your approach, in order to sort of penetrate that granite.
Great. So just following up on the audience part, in terms of Queen's Gambit, so chess is a very complex sport. And while making the series, what were your considerations of making a series that the chess lovers won't find boring, while at the same time, like people who don't know chess would find interesting?
Yeah, that was the dilemma. And that was my big worry, because when I was writing the series, before I even started directing it, when I was writing it, I would tell myself, okay, what is the least amount of chess we can get away with and still understand the story? Because we only need to understand enough about the chess games to understand where she's at emotionally. So if I could contextualize the games in a storytelling sense, the same way a musical number furthers the story, you know, on the other end of the musical number. Maybe these chess tournaments and games would feel more like that, like there are character stakes, and not just, is she going to win, is she going to lose? Because I had a character who was both a protagonist and antagonist in the same body. She was both of those things at once. So the games very much became, or the matches very much became, okay, what do we need to know in order to talk about how she feels, in order to understand why she lost, in order to understand why she won, in order to understand how she took advantage of that other person, without knowing all the ins and outs of what's happening on the chessboard. Lots of trial and error, and trial and error is the secret to success. It's also in my business known as rewriting, or but out in the world, I would say you try things don't work until they do. And you have to accept that. You have to accept if it doesn't work, that isn't the universe telling you you shouldn't keep going. That's the universe telling you that anything good is really difficult, and you have to find a different way. And so this no, you may get, I don't know how many no's or rejections, or the thing you're trying to make work may not be working. But if you believe in it, and the process of making it work is what's feeding you, then you don't give up.
Very nice. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the risks. So the economics of entertainment are probably very different from other industries. Because the success of an entertainment content or piece can be sometimes very unpredictable, like coming back to the same thing we were talking before. And consequently, it can be very risky to be part of the industry in terms of return of investment, right? So how do you say you manage this uncertainty when creating a new piece from scratch? And what are your keys to success?
Well, first of all, no one should ever invest in the entertainment business. I would just not. I think it's very risky. Audiences are fickle because you can't predict anything. You don't know what people like. And like I said, the minute you try to guess, you're wrong or too late or something. I think all you can do, it depends on which side you're on, but I would suggest that on both sides of the desk, whether you're on the executive corporate side of filmmaking, or writer, director, producer, what have you, you can only start with something you believe in and that you can't stop thinking about. And that isn't a calculated choice. It isn't a careerist choice. It is something that you're doing because I can't stop thinking about this. Those ideas are few and far between. And the truth is, anything good is going to get hard at a certain point. As I said, you're going to want to give up, and you're going to fall out of love with it. And you need to figure out a way to, when you get stuck, you hit that wall, what do you do to get to the other side of that wall? What do you do when you're stuck? Do you give up? In which case, the next project you do, you're going to hit the same wall, and you're just going to keep hitting it over and over. You see that in relationships with people. You know, if you don't really work on it, you can have the same problem in relationship after relationship. And the same thing goes for something we're trying to create, whether it's a business, a product, a film, what have you. So the risk, if you're going to take the risk, since there is no guarantee, I'll take the pressure off right now. There's no way of knowing. There's no key to success. None. There isn't one. Otherwise, we'd all be super successful. There is no key to success. There are no rules to be successful. There are no anything. There are certainly rules and ways to develop things and to work on things, what have you, but who knows? Who knows what it is? The one common denominator, though, in people who are successful is that they believe in what they're doing and they're passionate about it, and they take risks. They're willing to take a shot. They're willing to bet on themselves. So you can't ask someone to bet on you if you're not willing to bet on yourself. If you don't have something that really means something to you, then why bother? Then the idea isn't good enough. If it's just like, well, this would be cool, well, then forget it. It's not going to happen. You know, I would meet lots of people who want to get into the film business. Yeah, I just thought it might be fun. Well, you're never going to ever get into the film business. So, and you know, and maybe if you do, you might last a week, but that's, yeah, sorry. Anything, if you're going to be good at anything, you want to really master it. And so if you want to spend your time doing something, you want it to be something you have to do. And that's the only thing I know. And it may still fail. It may still fail. So better to fail trying to do something you love. The worst feeling is failing at something you were only doing kind of half-heartedly. Then you really feel stupid. I had a tennis instructor who used to say it's way better to hit it out of the court than to hit it into the net.
That's so cool. And can I ask you, why did you get into the industry in the first place? Only if you want to ask, if you want to answer this question.
Why? Well, because I just
Yeah.
love stories. I love stories. I love watching them, listening to them, and telling them. And you know, since I was a kid, I just loved reading. I loved watching good movies. It was everything I love in one place. I love music, and movies have all of that. But I also love writing books too, you know, and so that's also very satisfying to me. And because I don't have to work with so many people, I can do it by myself. But stories to me are everything. And stories, you know, we figure things out through stories, I think.
Again, putting it back into the Queen's Gambit context, so you took the risk and it was an overnight success. Did you anticipate the success? And my second part of the question would be, so how did the success impact you as a person, as a creator, and for the upcoming projects?
Two good questions. No, I didn't anticipate the success. If you would have told me that what happened was going to happen, I would have just laughed. In fact, on the set, I would make jokes, you know, hey, we're making chess sexy, you know, and the crew, you know, it was all shot in Berlin, and the German crew, you know, we'd laugh and you know, and I never thought that anybody would watch it. And in fact, there were days when I was shooting and I thought, God, I'm not really doing a good job. I don't think I got this right. Oh man, I really messed that up. I hope I hope I could fix that later in the editing room. You know, I just really, and then when we finished, a weird thing happened, you know, and I've been doing this a long time, 35, 6 years, something. And I said to my wife, I said, you know what? This is the first time where I finish something and I really don't care what happens to it. I'm just really happy. I really like it actually, because normally I can't watch my stuff when I'm done. All I see are the mistakes. And this one, the mistakes made it beautiful. You know, I was just perfectly happy with it. So I never anticipated anything. I thought, this is it. This is really good. And then we started showing it to people, and the reaction was bananas. And I'm just glad I'm 60 and not, you know, 20 when this happened, because I have plenty of stuff to do. I've had, you know, other successes in my life, so it's not going to change my decision making. I have a lot of friends who over the years, especially if they win awards or things, they get what I like to call a case of the importance, where suddenly whatever choice you do, it's really got to be important. And I remember asking a filmmaker friend of mine, I was trying to get him to direct something I'd written, and that I did, and we were talking about it, and he said, you know, he said, Scott, I have to be very careful. I mean, let's say his name was Joe Smith, this filmmaker. And he said, Scott, I have to be very careful. I really have to think about what would Joe Smith do next? Literally talking about himself in the third person, as if just, you know, now he's seeing himself in this way. And I thought, wow, that's a cautionary tale, if ever there was one. So you just, and everything I'm doing now going forward, to answer your question, is stuff I was going to do before the Queen's Gambit. It's just I kind of slowly check off the things I want to do and do them, and I haven't changed any of that really. And so this has been super nice, confusing because I didn't expect it, very confusing, but also nice, and I'm thrilled that people like it. I had a great time making it. I thought the last thing I did was the best experience I ever had. By the way, in a career full of lovely experiences, I've had very few experiences where I just never want to talk to anybody involved. And then this one came along and it was even better, and that was good enough. And then bizarrely, I'll say one other thing about this too. There is, again, to go back, there is a phrase that sounds super pretentious, but it is what will save you in the end, whether it works out or not. And that is purity of intent. Purity of intent. If you do something for the right reasons, whatever happens, if it doesn't work out, there's going to be some net positive for you. Even if it doesn't happen, there's going to be something you're going to get from the attempt.
Okay. That was beautiful. I would just have a follow-up question on that. Do you think Netflix is a way to succeed nowadays?
Streaming, yeah,
Mhm.
streaming. I think it's all streaming all the time. I think I've become very agnostic in terms of how how I watch stuff. You know, I'll see it on, you know, my kids are all your age. They watch everything on their computers. You know, I'll see them on their bed with their laptop, and it makes me nuts. I ride the train in New York, and people are watching, you know, these big epic shows on their phone. So, you know, I think it is the future. I think accessibility, I think much like with when Napster first came out and music became really easy to get, this is a bell you can't unring. And COVID only exacerbated that. I mean, people will still want to go to movie theaters because it's still a great way to experience it. But for a lot of us, movie theaters have become kind of a joke because people are texting and talking and getting up and eating nachos and doing all kinds of shit that ruin the movie experience. And the theaters don't take care of the bulbs or whatever it is. The sound is wrong. But at the same time, when you see a movie in a good theater in a good way, there's nothing like it. And I don't think that's going to disappear. But I do think people have gotten used to the accessibility of so much story out there.
Cool. Now going to the last topic, how is technology shaping the film industry today? So how do you see innovation impacting production and film direction in the future?
Well, technology, is to piggyback on what we were just talking about. I mean, technology, streaming, the internet has changed everything. So there's that. Now, what you have at the same time in terms of production is the digital technology. I've never shot. I was a writer for a long time before I was a director. I was a director starting in around 2006. I've never shot anything on film. Never shot anything on film. I've shot everything digitally. And what you can do in the digital world now, Queen's Gambit, for example, takes place in Las Vegas, Mexico City, Paris, Moscow, Kentucky, New York City. I shot 80 some days in Berlin, and I shot 4 days in Toronto for some exteriors. Very few exteriors. Everything we did in Berlin, all we needed was a piece of something because digitally I could turn it into something else. And the technology for production now, to make it easier, you can make a movie on your phone. You can make a really good movie on your phone. People have done it. And people have made movies on their phones that have been released. Steven Soderbergh has done that, you know, in the theater. A few people have done that. So there's a lot you can do right now. The technology is exploding to both make it easier and to make it at the same time, if this makes sense, more real, but also so that you can create worlds as well very easily. And on the post-production side, in the case of, again, with the Queen's Gambit, when COVID hit, I had only been editing for a month and I had 4 or 5 more months of post-production to go. Everybody moved home. I basically cut on my laptop with the editor. She was in Chelsea. I was here in Connecticut. Somebody else, the sound designers were in California. I had somebody else in Germany, you know, the visual effects guys. There's applications and programs now where you can all share, and I can work with the editor just like I'm sitting on the couch behind her in the cutting room. And so that technology, again, is making it easy to collaborate and easy to work, and that's exploding. And the imagery is only getting better. It's all only improving. Even since I finished the show, it's already gotten better in so many ways. In fact, I'm wondering, why do we ever need to have a cutting room again? It's $30,000 a month to rent the cutting room, whereas we can all do it from home and just go in for the last final stuff when we need to see it on a big screen. But so technology, the thing is changing so much. Now the trick becomes not to have the technology dictate the story. So you don't want to make the story, you want to tell a story and then use, just like you would in the old days, what lens, you know, am I going to use? What style am I going to, you know, the same time, you want to use it appropriately. You don't want to use it just because you have it. I mean, And so there's a lot of stuff when it comes out and everybody's using it. You see it constantly. Sometimes a new kind of lens will be out there and you suddenly notice everyone's using it. But again, you have to think about what's appropriate. This bowling alley drone footage you all saw, I bet. Have you seen that? Spectacular footage of this promotion they did for this bowling alley in Minnesota, I think. Super well done. Super well done, but there's a mistake you're going to make. So that is a film, and it is an amazing film. I mean, I can't stop watching it. It's amazing. And I want to know how they did it. I'm constantly trying to go, okay, and I think they just flew the thing through the bowling alley. I mean, I really think that's how they did it. There are no effects. It is just great work. But you don't want that to suddenly become how you're going to make movies. Again, that worked for that. That was a perfect thing. But people take that, and when drones first came out, in fact, everything was a drone shot. Everything, and even if you looked at real estate, there was drone shots. So the drone shot became much like what happened to the close-up, the most overused thing, where there's always a drone shot. You're like, oh, why do I need a drone shot? Do I have to be over the trees in the backyard? Do I really, because again, the technology is leading, not the storytelling. And you got to lead with the storytelling and then figure out what works best to tell the story.
Great. So that all was very insightful. And now we'll have a fun rapid fire round. So the rules of the round are that I'll ask a question and you have to answer in a split second as fast as you can. Does that sound good?
So I have not seen these questions.
No, you haven't.
Was I supposed to have seen it? Okay. All right, I'm ready.
That's the fun, because that would kill the fun of the rapid fire. It won't be rapid and spontaneous anymore.
I know. I'm just trying to figure.
You can say skip.
Okay.
You're allowed to say skip.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. So, who do you draw inspiration from?
My father.
TikTok or Instagram?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
TikTok or Instagram? None. No social media at all. It's toxic.
Okay. What is the one thing you still have from your childhood?
But by the way, if I were to, I'd probably be TikTok. What is the one thing from my childhood
that you still have from your childhood?
Nothing.
What does creativity mean to you?
Happiness.
What is something you can't do?
Something I can't do? The splits.
What is something you can do that other people can't do?
Skip.
Where was the best vacation you ever took? You ever have
Africa.
taken? What is something you wish you could be good at?
Speaking a foreign language.
How do you manage stress?
Drugs.
What is your pet peeve?
When people dance spontaneously in movies and scenes where they just get up and start dancing in a room in their kitchen or their fucking living room or whatever, it makes me nuts. It just doesn't happen.
Okay. One piece of advice you could give to your younger self?
Relax.
Favorite actor you have not yet been able to cast?
Clint Eastwood.
What is your guilty pleasure?
Oh man. What is my guilty pleasure? Come back to that. Skip. Too many. I think everything I do is a guilty pleasure.
What do you first notice about someone when you meet them?
If they're smiling.
What's the first thing you thought of this morning?
The first thing I thought of?
This morning, yeah.
The fact that my 85-pound Labrador was laying on top of me, licking my face, trying to get me to feed him, and that it was 5 a.m.
What do you miss the most about Queen's Gambit?
The people, the crew.
What is something you can never overinvest in?
Yourself and your relationships.
Do you remember the first thing you ever wrote?
I do. Do you want to know what it was?
Yeah.
It got me in a lot of trouble. I was 5 or 6 and we had to write a thing about what you did over Easter. And I was bored and we had to draw a picture of it. I wasn't even writing of it, but we had to draw a picture and write a caption. And I drew a picture of my dad beating on my mother with a bottle of something, ketchup, I think it was. And the teachers called home and said, "Everything okay back home? Everything all good?" That was the first thing. And the reaction was so good, I had to do it again.
Okay, and the last one is one thing you wish you could unlearn.
One thing I wish I could unlearn. I don't know. That's a really good question. I have to skip it. I have to think. I don't know. I have nothing. I have a big blank. Sorry.
You have 15 minutes before like the session ends if you come up with an
Okay.
answer for that.
Okay. Okay.
And I think with that, we can open up for the audience to ask whatever they want. We have, I think, a few questions in the chat. If Philip, you want to like unmute yourself and ask the question, or do you want us to ask whatever you prefer?
Thanks. Hi, Scott. Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it. It's really interesting. My question is more on the business side. I was talking with a friend of mine who's an independent film producer, and he was telling me that Netflix often does a model where they buy out a larger proportion of the production in advance, and like a cost plus model, he called it. And they buy out, and then as part of the deal, you buy out the back end of the profits of the show. Was that the case for you? And given the enormous success of Queen's Gambit, how do you feel about that model now? Like, how would you do it again? Yeah, how do you feel about the model generally as a way of changing the industry standard?
I think on my end, I'm okay with it. You know, I'm okay with both in terms of the back end buyout they did on Godless and the back end buyout they did on the Queen's Gambit as well. And by the way, they gave me some rather lovely bonuses on that I were not, you know, negotiated or contractual or anything. They just did. I think that in the end, it comes out in the wash. I think on the lower end of things, people are getting ripped off. I think Disney in particular, they're giving you nothing for the buyout. They're doing it across the board. It's just not, you're almost wondering, why am I doing it? Because at least if you were taking a pay cut, you had other ancillary markets with, you know, from where you could draw income if your show did really well. The Queen's Gambit was such a fluke. And I think I was so grateful that they let me make it. I agreed to the terms of it. I felt while I was making it that I was actually well paid and really happy. So to suddenly go, oh my God, I got ripped off, or I shouldn't have done that, I don't feel that way. It's a fool's errand to kind of live that way. So it is increasingly the market because a lot of these streamers are closed ecosystems. So how do you monetize it? I suppose you can build in some kind of bonus for streams, but even then it's tricky. So I think that it's still finding its way, and I think there'll be other ways they compensate you, but I think it works. I mean, what happens to Netflix a lot of times is somebody, particularly on the movie side, more on the television side, but people bring them a movie that should be a $30 million budget movie, but they want everybody, because it's Netflix, wants to get paid so much because of what you just said, that it becomes an $80 million movie. And then Netflix doesn't do it unless it's, you know, one of 3 stars or a filmmaker that they really want to be in business with. So what they normally do now is they'll wait to see, people will package their movies ahead of time, even already make them, and then sell them to Netflix for distribution. And then Netflix, it comes down, you're still making a nice profit on, you know, what your budget was. But Netflix doesn't feel like they're getting gouged unless they're in it. And usually there may be a bidding war. It is, I think it's still forming. I'm okay with it so far. Ask me in 3 years.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Great question. Maybe there's another question in the chat from Findlay. You want to ask
Hi,
it?
yeah. Hi, Scott. Nice to meet you. Loved Godless. So my question is, you've worked as a creator for decades. I worked in film production for a number of years before doing this MBA. Is there currently a piece of the creation process, either pre, principal, post, or distribution, that could be expedited or improved with a better tool that we could be building at Cornell Tech?
Yes, and somebody's building it. And I'm experimenting with it on a project in New Zealand right now. Post is very, prep is very disorganized, and they've created, I forget what it's called, but they've created this program where everybody on their iPad, you have the script and you can push a thing on the script and you can see what the renderings are from the art department. You can see, any storyboards, if there's video that someone shot or tests, it's all in one place. So everybody is constantly in sync. Everyone, instead of getting 50,000 different emails from different departments, you're all working off the same tool. I think that's a really useful thing. Post, I feel like the way post works in terms of sound and picture, I kind of created my own post-production process in that normally you begin cutting, and then very late in the process, you begin adding your sound design. So you're just creating temporary sound using effects off the Avid or whatever you're cutting with, or off the internet. You're just kind of not really using anything. And then they bring in the sound editors to create the sound design. And it's late in the day always. And then you get to your final mix at the very end, and you're sitting there watching your piece on the big screen and hearing it all mixed. And with all of a sudden you realize, oh, if I had known that, I would have cut that differently. That would have been slower, faster, whatever. If I had known that. Also, you're temping it. Your composer comes in late because you're temping it. And so with a different composer, which I don't like to do anymore, so I use the same composer, and he and I are working even sometimes when I'm writing the script, because you want to know how things are going to work. And the argument against it was always, we don't want to mix as we go, or what you call a rolling mix, because you have to keep redoing it. And I say, well, you have to keep re-editing, you have to keep rewriting. So what I've done on the last few things, A Walk Among the Tombstones, Godless, and now Queen's Gambit, is we had a rolling mix where right next to the editing room was the sound editor, and right next to him was the music editor. So everybody is working together. I finish a reel, I give it to the sound designer, and then I can go in, he can call me in, or if we're doing it virtually, show me. I can listen and sample and see what he's doing and give him more direction, and so yes, we start him sooner, which is more money, but on the other end, our final mix is very short. It's half the time, because the changes and fixes are much fewer because we've done them already. And you also have a better sense of how your show or your film plays. Right away, you are able to work with it and experiment and solve problems with listen, you only have 2 senses to work from. You have sight and you have sound, and that's it. Yet we keep sound out of it until too long, and sound for me is hugely important. And so if there's a way to integrate that process, right now I just do it that way, and I tell them ahead of time so they know what the cost is going to be, and we save other ways. That's my thing, is that it's too separate. Everything is done too separately instead of kind of worked on together.
Awesome, thank you.
David?
You can call it Sight and Sound. You can call it that. Sight and Sound Pro. I mean, come on, get started. You can get off the Zoom now and get going.
David, you can go next.
Yeah, hi Scott. Thanks so much for being here. I love so much of your work. I still remember seeing Out of Sight when I think I was 14 when it came out, and it's such a great film. But I must say, I've been playing way too much online chess recently, to the detriment of my both my pride and my grades. Anyway, you know, I found it like interesting. You mentioned like the importance of creativity in you know, the product design process and entertainment, but you also said you believe it's very difficult, if not impossible, to predict whether a project is going to be successful with audiences, right? And you talked a lot about risk taking, and that, you know, a lot of what we talk about at Cornell Tech is around using machine learning to predict outcomes, right? And being very kind of data driven and methodical during the product development process. And you know, we've all heard about the power of the Netflix algorithm, right? To kind of predict what's going to actually be a hit with audiences, and maybe what's going to work, which kind of is a little bit of odds with what you said, right? So you know, I just kind of think like, what are your views on this? Like, is the industry becoming less creative? Is it going to be dominated by the algorithms? I mean, you know, many people decry like Hollywood is becoming so formulaic and stuff. So I just like to like get your views on that. Thanks.
That's a great question. Let's break it up a little bit. The algorithm, I think, is a great thing, but not because of what you say. The algorithm, the way they use it best is, if you'll notice, Netflix shows are not marketed a lot up front. You know, sometimes you don't even know something is out until it's out, because what they do is, because they don't need an opening weekend the way movie studios do, conventional movie studios, and that model where everything hinged on the opening weekend is a relatively new thing in the world, where they would print the box office in the newspaper and it was like a game who was number one. When I started, that wasn't there. But so what the algorithm does is it sees who and how people watch the show. It sees who in terms of whatever, you know, their demographic is, obviously, but it sees how in terms of what they watch before, what they watch after, what they have in their queue, what they have been watching historically. That's the big part of it. So that when they're watching, seeing who comes to the show and how they come to the show, then they begin to market towards those people. Now the algorithm begins to learn who is the audience for this, who is the audience, and how can we target them. So the most important tool I learned in terms of marketing are those little thumbnail pictures as you're on the website, you know, trying to figure out what you're going to watch, because your image will be different than my image. I pick 18 or 20 of them. I forget how many we end up with, because those, everybody gets a different image, and then they learn which are the most popular. Then they learn which of them get the most play, and then that begins to become part of it. You know, which images are people responding to, and so on. So the algorithm for me is less about what they want to make and more about what they do with what they've made. And in terms of deciding what they want to make, so much of it is, what don't we have? And what are people watching? And what could we have more of? They've said no to me about many things. You know, I even before right after Godless, I pitched them 2 or 3 things and assumed when I gave them the book for the Queen's Gambit that they would just go no. So I was kind of shocked, because frequently they would say, we already have something like this, or we don't know who this is for, or you know whatever it is, or we just did something like this and it didn't work, and so we don't, you know, they have whatever the reasons are. But once they commit to making it, now everything comes to play in terms of how to sell it, and that is the technology. And I'm a big believer in it. I don't think it's scary or creepy or whatever. I think, you know, when it works well, I've been suggested things that I've discovered. When it's annoying when they're in your face everywhere. And this has been coming for a while. I remember when I was writing Minority Report, we had a think tank, and basically they were saying technology is not going to be used to spy on you. It's going to be used to sell to you. And that's what you're getting. And in some ways, sometimes that's bad. It's annoying when you mention the word Campari in your house and you're getting advertising somehow on your computer and your phone and everything, and you don't even know how it knows that. That's annoying. But what they're trying to do is something different. They're really trying to get you to participate in this thing, help us help you figure out what you want to watch on one side, and on the marketing side, they're trying to say, how can we maximize its impact? I talked so long, you had another question in there. Or did you get it?
No, I mean, that's like absolutely fascinating, actually. It's so much for us to think about there, actually, why don't we just build what we have and then, think about how we can use technology to better serve. I think I was just asking whether you feel that the creativity is disappearing from the industry, or
oh, that was the other thing. No, quite the opposite. I think because the technology is making accessibility more democratic, if you will, I think you're seeing more and more creativity. I mean, the bowling alley drone thing is super creative. They're out in the world. There's stuff that's coming that's really creative. And in terms of movies and stories, think about it. Look at documentaries. Documentaries are a harbinger. Documentaries, no one watched documentaries 10, 15 years ago. The documentary was Frederick Weissman's High School, and it's like, oh, fuck, really? Or it was Nanook of the North or whatever. And so documentaries, even there are a few good ones, obviously, I'm exaggerating greatly, but people were not obsessed with them. People were not binge watching documentaries. There were obviously some great documentary filmmakers, but now the best stories, the best, and particularly in America, the best stories are documentaries. Why? Because they're character driven. They're not calculated. Maybe the subject is purient in some cases, but they curate all of this character. They gather all of this character and then form a story from the character, create a structure instead of a conceptual idea that they can sell. Obviously, they're picking subjects that they think are going to be interesting, but I can't tell you how many times I've watched things. Something happened there. Are we okay? Can you hear me? I've watched things that I thought I'm not going to be interested in, and I'm riveted, and the most creative stuff is happening. Just watch Dick Johnson Is Dead. If you want to see something terrific, watch that. Watch Collective, the I think it's Romanian documentary. Fantastic. I mean, I could go on and on. There are docuseries and things that are amazing out there, and they're great, really great stories.
Great. Thank you so much for that question, David. And I think with this, we're running out of time. Thank you so much, Scott, again. I really enjoyed the session. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was purity of intent. I think that will stick with me for longest. Yeah, I think we have a coffee chat after this, and if LA can jump in and run the logistics for that. But thank you so much again for joining in.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks
really
everyone
enjoyed
for
it.
attending. If you are a part of the coffee chat, please just hang out on the Zoom, and we'll be able to just chat with Scott in a smaller setting. There is still a little bit of room, so if you'd like to hang back and join last minute, please feel free.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to jump off, and I'll let you have a good cup of coffee.
Okay.